This is a custard, but you might know it by the common name of cheesecake. This one, however, is low-carb and keto friendly, and along the way you may encounter some pitfalls. But it starts the night before.
Yes, the night before. Cheesecake is not a dessert that is made at the drop of a hat. He places 3 blocks of full-fat cream cheese on the counter along with 5 large avian eggs. That's 5 large, not normal, not extra large, but large. He must also set aside some sour cream, of which he appears to have run out. He opens a new lid and removes off the freshness seal with the intent to harm nothing but the container itself. It is absolutely critical that the ingredients be at room temperature, otherwise the custard will be lumpy, bumpy, and make everyone grumpy. Then it's time for bed, because the next day it's time to wake and bake. He preheats the oven to 350 degrees American, then, using his favorite scale and a random bowl, adds 125 grams of finely ground almond flour, followed by 40 grams of Allulose sweetener.
So you might be wondering why I'm using something like Allulose instead of erythritol or swerve. Reason is erythritol recrystallizes when it cools, which leads to a sensation of eating sand, which I honestly don't prefer. You can mitigate some of this by making a confectioner's erythritol by putting a food processor or the pulverizer and making a nice fine powder, and it's going to help a little bit, but it's still going to have that grainy texture. Allulose, on the other hand, is a great alternative sweetener and dissolves completely. So this is my go-to for cheesecake.
And a great choice at that. Next, 3 teaspoons of cocoa powder are added along with half a teaspoon of cinnamon, including a spoon, a teaspoon of kosher salt, and he also needs some butter, 4 tablespoons to be exact. But since he doesn't have a microwave to melt it, he cuts it into small pieces and places into an oven-safe ramekin. Then into the preheating oven to melt it goes. This is optimum efficiency in energy usage. Next, we require some parchment paper for baking. Cheesecake is often cooked in a springform pan like this one, because the goodness is easy to remove once baked. But since these are incredibly leaky and is in fact custard, we will instead be using an aluminium pan. This is a small shallow pan, but it's all he has.
9.5 inches?
That's what she said. He will also need a larger pan like this one so he can place a smaller one inside like a Russian doll. For the next step, he could trace a small pan, but that's rather difficult. Instead, he begins folding. Once folded until he can fold no more, he measures from the center of the bottom to the outer wall. Using his scissors, which he likes to play with while running, he severs the fibers at the mark. When unfolded, he has a Spanish fan fit for tango. But when unfolded completely, he has a circle that fits perfectly inside his pan. Neat. Then he requires a long piece of parchment paper. Don't be stingy. He rolls it up and measures it against the height of the wall of the pan. Using another imaginary line, he cuts the tree fibers and makes sure that freshly cut strip of paper is tall enough and long enough. Then, using nature's glue, he rubs the pan with a stick of butter, making sure to cover every square and round inch there is, utilizing his finger to ensure it's fully covered. The circle of truss is placed inside the bottom base and spread out. Then he covers the side walls, which are a bit tricky since they are not straight, but he perseveres. He glues and folds where needed to ensure a tight seal of the paper against the coated aluminium. Then it's set aside for a bit while he tends to his crust. He retrieves the now melted butter from the firebox. As a reminder, you could also use a microwave to melt the butter. He mixes his dry ingredient mixture until it looks like Nesquik. However, don't add this to milk or you'll regret it. He adds the hard butter and begins to mix. Soon enough, you will have what appears like moist gardening soil from your neighbor Susan's compost heap. This is poured into the lined pan. Then, using a 4-pronged spear, he spreads the crust around and begins to pack it down. Then, he switches to using a measuring cup to press the crust in, albeit not too firmly, otherwise you end up doing this. Simply patch and pretend like absolutely nothing of the sort ever happened. Nothing to see here, just a man packing his crust. Move along now. The crust is then placed into the hot box to part bake for 10 minutes. Then, it's onwards and upwards to the filling. Into the stand mixer mixing bowl, he adds 20 ounces of room temperature cream cheese, or in American, 2.5 bars of the Gorilla Bread filling. The remaining half can be stored to sustain life on Mars. Using a pedal attachment, he fiddles with the archaic connection, raises the bowl, and sets the speed to a brisk medium pace in order to beat the cream until silky smooth. In the meantime, he removes the par-baked crust from the oven and lowers the temperature to 250 degrees American. He He tries to cool the crust using manual methods, but instead sets it aside to comply with the laws of thermodynamics. Once the cream cheese is smooth like a criminal, it's time to add the sour cream. Due to past failures, he likes to double check the temperature of the cream by sticking his finger in it. This is akin to how the temperature of a horse is checked in the old country, and in the same manner, he licks his finger clean, ignoring any and all food safety regulations. The bowl is nestled back into the mixer and brought up to speed to make the cream smoother than before. Afterwards, he must begin heating a decent amount of water for the sauna bath. You can use a large kettle, but he will heat this water the old-fashioned way, with yoga flame. Next, it's time for the chicken eggs, of which one appears to be missing. Luckily, he has some spare eggs left on the counter the night before. Then, cracking eggs like heads, he starts by adding 2 of the large eggs in their entirety into the containment vessel. Using a separate container as a precaution, he separates 3 yolks from the whites, removing the chalazé as he goes. He returns to the churn to check the creams. The circle dancing has created a silky smooth performance, perfect for introducing a cup of Allulose. Thus, from the top they must begin once more until the third dancer is incorporated seamlessly into the performance. He adds some vanilla extract, and once the sweetener has dissolved, it's time to add one of the pillars of the custard, the nutritious yellow pre-chickens. He adds 1 yolk at a time until it's well combined before adding the next. The necessary step is to stop and scrape the bowl down to remove and prevent any lumps. Also ensure to scrape down to the very bottom. Trust me. Then he returns to mixing and adding 1 egg at a time until they're well combined. Just add the remaining of the eggs. Once the ingredients are nice and even, he halts the mixing so as not to overmix, as this can lead to a sad, droopy cheesecake. If the filling looks like this, stop. Something along the line went horribly wrong. Therefore, it's best to save yourself embarrassment at the dinner party and start over. As he pours the filling into the crust, it has a few lumps and air bubbles, but it's mostly smooth. If, however, it looks like this, chunky and vomity, you f***ed up. When comparing the two, the difference becomes crystal clear. The one on the left is a failure. However, the one on the right is not perfect. As he scrapes the bowl, he discovers unmixed cream cheese. Apparently, he didn't scrape enough of the bowl when he was mixing, and so he is called inaudible. Dennis pours the filling back into the mixing bowl. As he feverishly scrapes the sides, he fixes the parchment paper, which is now soaked, and hopefully still able to perform its duties. He places the bowl back into the mix until the filling is smoothed over, and tries again. Next, he stamps out as many air bubbles as possible by repeatedly banging the pan. Then, using a large pan, a small towel is placed flat inside. This is then placed into the oven, and the filling is placed in the middle. He carefully adds hot water about 2/3 of the way up the pan. The towel prevents the hot water from splashing, as well as prevents the cheesecake from sliding around. The door of the box is closed, and the timer is set for 1 hour. In the meantime, he cleans, because ants. When the timer is up, he cracks the door ever so slightly for exactly 1 minute. This allows heat to escape, but not so quickly that it creates a rapid thermal differential inside. If you open the door completely, the cheesecake would look like an old man's elbow, cracked. He shuts the door and sets the timer for another hour. This will cook the cheesecake in the residual heat. Cheesecake is a dessert of love. It's time-intensive to create and requires special attention to temperatures. After removing the cheesecake from the oven, he must let it come to room temperature. So he sets it aside to cool, and again, we must wait. About 2 hours later, he checks on his dessert. It is cool to the touch and thus ready for refrigeration. This will go into the fridge for at least 6 hours. No shortcuts. Under no circumstances should you attempt to cover the cheesecake with wrap of the saran. It is the devil and will stick to your cheesecake like the bloodsucked leech of failure that it is. The next day he returns at first daylight to a cold and solid custard.
Not gonna lie, this looks good.
Using a thin knife such as this deboning knife, he scrapes along the sides of the pan. This helps release the cheesecake from the parchment paper it clings to ever so lovingly. He cuts a piece from his underneath the wrap of saran and places it on top of the filling. Since the filling is cold and hard, the plastic will cling but not destroy. The side it is set and he grabs his turntable and the large pan. To this we need to add hot water. Not warm water, not boiling water, but hot water. Safe to touch, but not pleasant to swim in. Roughly the same amount of water that was used in the oven sauna is added to the pan. Then the cheesecake is slowly lowered inside. The heat will melt the butter that holds the parchment paper to the pan and allow us to easily remove the custard. Next, a flat surface such as this cutting board is required. Ideally, it should be one of those round cake cardboard pieces, but he has none, and he also recycled all his Amazon boxes. A flat plate could also work, but he has none of those either. He then flips the custard onto the board. However, the smart thing would have been to place the board on top of the cheesecake and then flip that. But here we are. He gives a handful of love taps to encourage the custard to freedom, and slowly lifts the pan to release it from its dirty cage. The turntable is set on top of the crust, and the time for the acrobatic show has arrived. In one fell swoop, he flips the cheesecake onto the turntable. But also smashes it under the weight of the board. Fail.
I smushed it.
He carefully removes the plastic wrap from the top and the parchment paper from the sides, clearly having forgotten about the parchment paper under the crust. The custard appears to be tasty. He then inspects the cheesecake under a discerning eye.
I'll just show this side.
The decision is made to show the unsmushed side for the gram. The cake is then set aside for a hot minute while he prepares the side crust. For that he will use pecans, or pecans, depending on where you're from. You could also use walnuts, pistachios, or even peanuts, which are not actually nuts. The nuts are chopped into small pieces, and then it's time to append them to the custard. Using his right hand, your left, he carefully presses the nuts into the side of the custard. Due to the soft texture of the cheesecake, they stick like magic. This baby has back. And for the sake of presentation, he removes any tidbits which may have fallen on top. The details are everything. If you happen to crack your cheesecake, worry not. Cracks are easily covered by toppings such as berries, cherries, or his personal favorite, whipped cream. Simply dollop on top and spread out to cover your misgivings and culinary insecurities. However, this cheesecake is perfect, and so we must cut the first piece. Ideally, he would cut across with a large bread knife, but since this is a low-carb channel, bread and bread knives are not allowed. To ensure clean cuts, he cleans the knife after every slice. You must also cut to the very bottom and slide the knife out. To remove the slice, he carefully uses an appropriately sized metal triangle at the end of a wooden stick. Slowly and carefully, he raises the slice from the hole and carefully places it onto a plate made from bones.
So this is a very smooth cheesecake. As you can see, there's not much air bubbles. It's not like a standard New York style cheesecake. There's one way to make this better.
And that's Luxardo cherries. Although not low carb, they are simply too delicious, and to him, the carbs are worth it. So he adds a cherry and drizzles some of the cherry blood over top.
That's how you eat cheesecake.
Then it's time for the taste test. This cheesecake is silky smooth, with just the right amount of sweetness and a little tartness from the sour cream.
It's very custody.
And lives up to what it is, a custard masquerading as some sort of cake. If you want to kick diabetes in the face, make sure to like this video. And if you want to learn to cook low-carb and keto-friendly food to lead a healthy low-carb lifestyle, make sure to watch these other videos. Until next time, eat well.